they called their boat Soulmate. Think about that for a second. A retired Michigan couple, two people who had spent over 20 years building a life together, who had weathered a separation and found their way back to each other. And they named their vessel Soulmate. There's something almost unbearably ironic about that now, because the story of Lynette and Brian Hooker is a story about what love looks like when it starts to rot from the inside. And somewhere in the dark waters of the Bahamas, between the soft glow of island lights and the hiss of open sea, something went terribly, irreversibly wrong. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. People who knew her describe her as vibrant, physically fit, deeply capable, a woman who had spent enough time on the water to know how to move through it. She and Brian, 59, had been living the dream that so many couples fantasize about in the gray drudgery of ordinary life. They'd left behind their home in Onstead, Michigan, traded the snow and the routine for warm air and open ocean, and set off on a sailing adventure through the Bahamas. They documented everything: videos, photos, updates shared with the sailing community that had embraced them online. Soulmate wasn't just their boat, it was their identity. Their whole life was right there on that water. And then, on the night of April 4th, 2026, Lynette Hooker disappeared. What Brian told authorities was this: the two of them had taken their small 8-foot dinghy, not the main vessel, but the little motor-powered tender they used to get between islands, on an evening trip from Hopetown to Elbow Cay. The waters got rough. Winds picked up, and somewhere in that darkness, he said, Lynette lost her balance and went overboard. He said she fell into the sea still holding the boat's keys. And because she had the keys, and because the engine cut out, and because the currents were strong, he couldn't reach her. He said he watched her try to swim back toward the boat, and then the wind, he said, just blew them apart. He paddled for hours through the night. He made it to shore at the Marsh Harbor boatyard around 4 in the morning. He told someone there his wife was missing, and that person called the authorities. That's the story he gave. Now hold that version in your mind, because the people who knew Brian and Lynette best, the friends who had sailed alongside them, eaten dinner with them, exchanged messages with them, they heard that story, and something inside them shifted. Not grief, not just grief anyway, something else, something colder. Daniel Danforth was one of those friends. He and his wife had met the Hookers a few years earlier, bonding over their shared love of boating. When news of Lynette's disappearance began spreading online, Danforth reached out to Brian directly on Facebook. He just wanted to check in. Brian responded, and in that response, he laid out his version of events. Lynette swimming toward the boat, the wind pulling them apart. And Danforth sat there reading it, and his gut told him something was wrong. Not just inconsistent, wrong. He went to CBS News, he shared those messages. And he started talking, carefully, honestly, in the way that someone speaks when they don't want to believe what they're beginning to believe. He pointed out that Brian and Lynette always had their phones with them. They were known for it. Their whole sailing life existed through those phones. So why, on the night Lynette went missing, didn't those phones work? Why wasn't there a distress call, a signal, anything? He pointed out something else too, something that had been gnawing at him. The Hooker's main boat, Soulmate, was equipped with a thermal infrared camera, a piece of equipment worth $33,000. The kind of camera that can detect a human body in dark water. The kind of thing you use when someone you love is floating out there somewhere in the night, and you're desperate to find them. Brian Hooker never used it. Not that night, not in the days after. Authorities weren't even made aware the camera existed until weeks later, when Danforth brought it up to the Coast Guard himself. They were, he said, very glad to hear the information, because it was the first time anyone had told them. Think about that. A man whose wife allegedly fell into the sea, a $33,000 thermal camera sitting on his boat, and no one thought to use it. But it wasn't just Danforth who was starting to pull at the threads. Another friend, Blaine Stevenson, had been in contact with Brian in the days after Lynette went missing. He'd gotten on a phone call with him, and as Brian talked about that night, about the wind, about the currents, Stevenson found himself getting confused, not because the story was complicated, because it kept shifting. The details didn't stay still, so Stevenson started recording. "He was all over the place," he said later, "and I was getting confused. That's why I started recording." That call, nearly 45 minutes long, was eventually obtained by media. In it, Brian describes what he calls a cassacote of failures: the weather, the equipment, the navigation. "We did so many things wrong," he says on the recording, his voice carrying the shape of a man who is either devastated or performing devastation. And from the outside, it's becoming harder and harder to tell the difference. In the same call, he describes Lynette's fall like this: that she basically just bounced off the dinghy in the middle of a little blow. Little blow. 20-something knot winds, and she bounced off into the sea at night without a life jacket. Neither of them were wearing life jackets. Lynette Hooker's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, has not been quiet. She has been one of the loudest, most persistent voices demanding that this case be taken seriously. And what she has revealed about her stepfather has added a completely different dimension to this story. She told Fox News that she had witnessed Brian become physically violent toward one of his own daughters years earlier, that there had been a court case, that she had seen him choke one of his children. "He's just repeating patterns," she said. She also said something that stopped a lot of people cold. She said Lynette never drove the dinghy. Brian always drove. So why, on the night she allegedly fell overboard, did she have the keys? "I'm confused why she has the keys," Aylesworth said. "Because she never drove the dinghy. It was always Brian." The story doesn't add up. Those were her words. And the more you look at it, the more it feels like the story was never meant to fully add up, just to hold together long enough. Then came the GPS data. This is where the case cracked open. Forensic investigators, working through the devices recovered from Brian and the boat, found something that simply could not be explained away. GPS data from one of Brian Hooker's electronic devices, pulled from a marine navigation app he had been using, showed a track of his movements on the night of April 4th that did not match what he told investigators at all. The device showed him out on the open water. It showed him stopping. The device went still, stationary, in the middle of the Sea of Abaco, and then it showed him returning to shore. He had told investigators where Lynette went over. He had drawn annotated maps. He had sent them coordinates and descriptions, and authorities had searched those areas extensively. But the GPS data suggested they had been searching in the wrong place entirely, because Brian Hooker's own phone had been somewhere else. The U.S. Coast Guard confirmed it. They announced a new search, a dive team, requesting permission from Bahamian authorities to enter the specific region of the Sea of Abaco where the GPS data showed movement. The boat, Soulmate, had already been seized. It was moved from Fort Pierce to Fort Lauderdale so investigators could properly extract its data, including the footage, from that $33,000 thermal camera that was never used the night a woman fell into the sea. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He was detained for questioning by Bahamian authorities, held for several days, and released without charges. After his release, he traveled back to the United States, reportedly to see his ailing mother. His attorney has maintained his innocence throughout. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, between the recordings and the text messages and the annotated maps and the GPS data, a woman named Lynette Hooker is still missing. Her mother hasn't heard from Brian. Her daughter is fighting publicly for answers. Her friends are sitting on recordings they never thought they'd need to make. And somewhere in the dark, clear water of the Bahamas, the sea is still keeping whatever it knows. The investigation is ongoing. Brian Hooker has denied any wrongdoing. And the boat they named, Soulmate, is sitting in Fort Lauderdale, waiting to give up its secrets. This has been a Creep Story Archive investigation. If you want to stay inside cases like this as they develop, the questions that don't get answered, the details that don't line up, subscribe. We'll be here.